The first splinter of wrongness lodged itself in my gut the moment I saw it. A garish red and white for sale sign, hammered askew into the rich earth of my lake ranch. My property? Not 50 yards from the ancestral gate my grandfather had forged with his own hands. It was more than an affront. It was a desecration. They had no right. This land, this sprawling expanse of timber and water, had been in my family for 3 generations. It was sanctuary. It was legacy. And some petty tyrant with a clipboard and a god complex had decided to list my land for sale illegally. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They didn't know that before I inherited this ranch, before I sought the quiet solace of its shores, my days were spent steeped in the meticulous, unyielding architecture of law and record. They didn't know I was the county registrar. The irony, so bitter it was almost sweet, coiled in my chest like a venomous snake. This wasn't just an overreach. This was a declaration of war. And they just handed me the map to their own oblivion. My boots crunched on the gravel drive as I approached the sign, a cheap piece of corrugated plastic, proclaiming the imminent auction of everything I held dear. The air, usually so clean and crisp with the scent of pine and lake water, felt tainted, thick with the audacity of it. I touched the sign, a cold anger seeping into my fingertips. It listed a local bottom-feeder realty company, Periwinkle Estates, a name that reeked of saccharine insincerity. Agnes Periwinkle, the self-appointed empress of the newly formed Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association, a pustule that had recently erupted on the otherwise serene body of our rural community. My ranch, predating any concept of an HOA by nearly a century, was an island of sovereign territory they desperately wanted to annex. They had crossed a line etched not just in property deeds, but in blood and memory. My calm was a carefully constructed dam, holding back a reservoir of fury. They thought this was a skirmish over bylaws and aesthetics. They were about to learn it was a fight for survival, and I was the apex predator in this particular ecosystem of legal documents and public records. The cool metal of my phone felt like a weapon as I dialed a number I knew by heart. This wasn't just about my ranch. It was about the principle of the thing, the sanctity of ownership, the quiet dignity of rightful possession. And Agnes Periwinkle had just nominated herself for a masterclass in consequence. The initial tremors of their campaign had been subtle, insidious. Little notes about the length of the grass near the county road, a passive-aggressive email regarding the rustic, their word, nature of my boathouse, a suggestion that the historic, unpainted fence my grandmother had loved somehow lowered the tone of a neighborhood that hadn't existed when it was erected. I'd mostly ignored them, these paper-cut aggressions. My father, a man who'd seen actual combat, had taught me to choose my battles, to conserve my fire. He'd also taught me that when someone aims for your heart, you don't just disarm them, you dismantle their entire arsenal. And listing my ranch for sale, my property, was an aimed shot. My family, my wife and 2 kids, were my emotional anchor, the true north of my moral compass. This ranch was their inheritance, their connection to a lineage of quiet strength. The thought of their bewilderment, their fear if this charade were to gain any traction, fueled a cold, precise rage. This wasn't just land. It was their future. Agnes Periwinkle, with her pinched face and perpetual air of aggrieved authority, had made this intensely personal. She represented everything I'd come to this quiet corner of the world to escape: the petty power plays, the narcissistic delusions of grandeur, the belief that a title, however self-bestowed, conferred infallibility. She saw a quiet man content with his acres. She failed to see the machinery of law whirring silently behind my eyes, the dormant authority I rarely chose to invoke. But for her, oh, for Agnes, I would make an exception. The for sale sign was not just an error. It was a calculated act of aggression, a belief that they could simply will my property into their domain. that their flimsy HOA covenants could supersede a century of legally recorded ownership. They were wrong. Legally, fatally wrong. The first call was to Gary. Gary was my eccentric ally, a whirlwind of conspiracy theories, drone technology, and an almost preternatural gift for unearthing digital detritus. He lived a few miles away, a fellow refugee from urban clamor, and our shared appreciation for privacy had forged an unlikely bond. "Gary," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the tremor I felt inside. "I have a situation. It involves a premature attempt to divest me of my ancestral lands by a certain floral-named entity." A beat of silence, then Gary's excited hiss. "Periwinkle? Don't tell me." She finally went full Napoleon? "More like full Borgia," I replied. "She's listed my ranch for sale. Illegally." The sputtering on the other end was immensely satisfying. "No." The sheer, unadulterated audacity. "What's the vector, boss? What's the op?" Gary always slipped into tactical jargon when agitated, a habit I usually found amusing but now found grimly appropriate. "Reconnaissance, Gary. I need everything you can find on Periwinkle Estates. The Lakeview Estates HOA, and Agnes Periwinkle herself. Digital footprint, financial breadcrumbs, any unusual flight patterns over her petunias." "The works. Consider it done," he chirped. "Operation Pruning Shears is a go. I'll have data streams converging on your secure server by nightfall. She won't know what hit her." My next step was a quiet drive to the county courthouse, not to my office as registrar, not yet, but to the Public Records Department, as a private citizen. I wanted to see the initial filings for the Lakeview Estates HOA with fresh eyes, as a target, not as an administrator. The clerk, a young woman named Daisy I'd hired 2 years prior, looked up, surprised to see me on this side of the counter. "Mr. Henderson, what brings you here?" she asked, her smile genuine. "Just a little light reading, Daisy," I said, my own smile not quite reaching my eyes. "Looking into a local HOA's formation documents." "Lakeview Estates." Her eyebrows shot up. "Oh, them. Mrs. Periwinkle is quite the regular. Very particular about her filings." "I can imagine," I murmured, pulling the thick binder she retrieved. The air in the records room was cool, smelling of old paper and binding glue, a scent I usually found comforting. Today, it felt like the antechamber to a surgical suite. I spent hours there, cross-referencing parcel numbers, easement agreements, the original plat maps of the area versus the HOA's declared boundaries. My property, my land, was clearly, unequivocally excluded from their jurisdiction in every historical document. The HOA's own founding charter, a document likely drafted by Agnes herself with a cut-and-paste legal template, was a masterpiece of overreach and ambiguous wording. But even it didn't dare to explicitly claim my ranch. The for sale listing was pure, unadulterated fabrication, a desperate bluff. The rage cooled, replaced by something far more dangerous, a cold, methodical certainty. They hadn't just made a mistake, they'd committed fraud. They'd slandered my title, they'd trespassed. And Agnes Periwinkle, in her boundless arrogance, had personally signed the realty listing agreement, a copy of which Gary's initial digital sweep had already unearthed from a poorly secured corner of Periwinkle Estates' website. Her signature, bold and looped, was a confession. The gears of my mind, the ones honed by years as county registrar, began to turn with relentless precision. This wasn't just about defending my ranch. It was about dismantling a petty tyranny built on lies and intimidation. Phase 1. Information dominance. Phase 2. Strategic containment. Phase 3. Surgical removal. Agnes Periwinkle had started a war, but I was going to choose the battlefield, the weapons, and the terms of surrender. And the first casualty would be her illusion of control. My family legacy, etched into the very soil of this ranch, demanded nothing less. My wife, Sarah, found me late that night in my study, surrounded by printouts, maps, and a rapidly cooling cup of coffee. The porch light, our beacon of home, cast long shadows across the room, mirroring the tendrils of my burgeoning plan. She knew the look on my face, the quiet intensity that signaled I was shifting from passive observer to active participant. "Agnes Periwinkle?" she asked, her voice soft, but with an undercurrent of steel. She'd been privy to the escalating HOA annoyances, her patience wearing thinner than mine. "She listed the ranch for sale," I said, watching her eyes widen, then narrow. The emotional anchor, indeed, her loyalty, her protective fury on behalf of our family, was a palpable force. "That woman," she breathed, "has signed her own warrant." It was moments like these I remembered why I'd married her. She understood the moral cost of inaction. She understood that some lines, once crossed, demanded a response that was both absolute and unequivocal. "I'm handling it," I assured her, tapping a highlighted section of the HOA's bylaws, a clause about fiduciary duty that Agnes seemed to have conveniently overlooked. "It will be educational for everyone involved." The next morning, I didn't go to my office. Instead, I logged into the county's secure GIS mapping system from my home computer, overlaying property lines, zoning regulations, and historical tax assessments. As county registrar, I had access to layers of information that were opaque to the public, a God's eye view of the legal landscape. Agnes Periwinkle's own property, a modest house on a cramped lot at the edge of the lake, suddenly came into sharp focus. A quick cross-reference with building permits, or rather, the conspicuous lack thereof, revealed an unpermitted dock extension and a rather large she-shed that suspiciously encroached on a public utility easement. Her meticulous attention to perceived infractions on others' properties apparently didn't extend to her own. The hypocrisy was galling, but tactically useful. Gary's drone footage, delivered overnight, confirmed it beautifully. Thermal imaging showed unauthorized electrical wiring to the shed, and high-resolution stills provided undeniable evidence of the easement violation. "She's running a commercial kiln in that shed, boss," Gary had reported gleefully in his notes. "Probably for those hideous periwinkle pottery monstrosities she tries to sell at the farmer's market. Bet she's not declaring the income either. Small potatoes, perhaps, but indicative of a pattern, a mindset that rules were for little people." This was no longer just about the illegal "for sale" sign on my land. It was about systemic abuse of a minor position for personal gratification and, potentially, profit. The HOA, under Agnes's thumb, had become her personal fiefdom. The neighbors, a mix of weekenders and retirees, were the silent majority, likely intimidated into compliance by Agnes's constant stream of violation notices and thinly veiled threats of fines. They were rebellion fodder, waiting for a spark. I began drafting the first of many documents, not angry emails, not cease and desist letters, destined for her recycling bin. No, these were formal complaints, meticulously referenced, legally irrefutable, addressed to state licensing boards, the county assessor, zoning enforcement, and the state attorney general's office regarding the fraudulent listing of my property. Each one was a precisely aimed dart, designed to prick the bubble of her self-importance and expose the rot within. The language was terse, cold, tactical. "It has come to the attention of the undersigned, pursuant to statute. Failure to rectify these violations will result in further legal action, including but not limited to the sheer weight of official correspondence arriving from multiple agencies would be the opening salvo." They thought they were dealing with a simple landowner. They were about to discover they had poked a hornet's nest with the county registrar inside, armed with the full weight of bureaucratic process. The beauty of it was that I didn't even need to reveal my position yet. The power was in the knowledge, the access, the understanding of how the levers of government worked. Agnes Periwinkle, in her quest to control a few acres of lakeside property, had unwittingly invited the entire regulatory apparatus of the county and state to scrutinize her every move. And I, the reluctant warrior, was merely the conductor of this orchestra of consequences. My actions were not born of malice, I told myself, but of a deeply ingrained sense of order, a belief that power, especially petty power, must be accountable. This was surgical precision, not a vendetta, though a small, intensely personal part of me admitted the thought of Agnes's face, when the first official letter arrived, did bring a grim sort of satisfaction. The initial volley of official inquiries hit Agnes Periwinkle like a series of well-placed sniper shots. First, a letter from the county zoning department regarding unpermitted structures on her property, complete with damning aerial photographs, courtesy of Gary's drone, anonymized and submitted through a public portal. Then, a query from the State Realty Board concerning the listing of a property without owner's consent, specifically, my ranch. My name was on the complaint as the aggrieved owner, but my title as county registrar remained my ace in the hole, unplayed. The effect, according to my discreet sources within the county building, Daisy, primarily, who had become an enthusiastic, if unwitting, intelligence asset, was spectacular. Agnes, usually so imperious, was seen scurrying between departments, her face a mask of bewildered fury. Her power, built on bluff and bluster, was crumbling under the weight of actual, verifiable regulations. She called me, of course. Her voice, usually dripping with condescension, was tight, almost shrill. "Mr. Henderson, I am simply appalled by these baseless accusations. This is harassment." I let her rant, my own voice calm, almost bored. "Mrs. Periwinkle," I said, when she finally paused for breath, "you seem to be confusing consequence with harassment. You listed my property for sale, illegally. You constructed unpermitted additions. These are facts, not accusations. The for sale sign was a misunderstanding, a clerical error," she spluttered, deadpan sarcasm strategically deployed. "Ah, yes, the classic clerical error defense, so often invoked when one is caught red-handed. Tell me, Mrs. Periwinkle, does this particular strain of clerical error also involve forging a seller's intent and broadcasting it publicly? Because that moves beyond mere incompetence into the realm of actionable fraud." There was a choked sound on the other end. I could almost see her, face mottled, hands clenching. You have no idea who you're dealing with." She finally managed, a pathetic echo of her usual threats. "Oh, I believe I do, Agnes," I said, letting a sliver of ice enter my tone. "The question is, do you?" I hung up. The dam of my restraint was holding, but the pressure was building. The true beauty of this tactical retaliation was its legitimacy. Every action I took was by the book, using the established channels. I was simply highlighting her transgressions to the relevant authorities. My position as county registrar merely gave me a deeper understanding of how those channels operated, and perhaps a more attentive audience when the time came. Gary, meanwhile, had turned his attention to the HOA's finances. The Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association, it turned out, was a non-profit corporation, subject to state oversight. Its publicly available financial disclosures were creative, large, unexplained, administrative fees, payments to vaguely named consultants, and a surprising lack of transparency regarding collected dues. "It's a slush fund, boss," Gary confirmed, sending me a meticulously organized spreadsheet. "She's treating the HOA coffers like her personal ATM. Those consultants? Pretty sure one of them is her nephew's struggling landscaping business, which, by the way, only seems to do work on her property." This was the moral violation that resonated beyond my personal grievance. She wasn't just a bully, she was potentially corrupt, preying on her neighbors, the very people she purported to represent. the silent majority. My next move was to request, formally and through an attorney I kept on retainer for ranch business, a nod to my dormant authority, always prepared, a full audit of the HOA's books, citing specific discrepancies Gary had flagged. The request was CC'd to every member of the HOA, along with a polite, factual summary of the situation regarding the illegal listing of my land and the zoning violations on Agnes's property. The first cracks in the wall of neighborhood silence began to appear. A tentative email from an elderly resident, thanking me for speaking up, a hushed phone call from another, detailing their own run-ins with Agnes's arbitrary enforcement. The rebellion fodder was stirring. They just needed a leader, or at least a shield. And I, the reluctant warrior, was slowly, deliberately, assuming that role. The battle lines were drawn. She thought she could seize my ranch. I was about to seize her entire kingdom of petty tyranny. The summons for the emergency HOA meeting arrived via certified mail, a clear sign Agnes was feeling the heat. The agenda: addressing recent malicious allegations and reaffirming community standards. My lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. Malicious allegations. Cute. I'd be bringing a rather thick binder of malicious facts. Sarah placed a hand on my shoulder as I reviewed my notes one last time. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, not questioning my resolve, but acknowledging the emotional toll. "This isn't just about the ranch anymore, is it?" "No," I admitted, the cold-blooded calm I'd maintained beginning to fray, revealing the explosive emotional undercurrents. "It's about a sickness, a petty despotism that takes root in small places if good people stay silent." She targeted our home, our legacy. She underestimated us. My family was the justification, the moral imperative. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that reeked of cheap air freshener and desperation. Agnes Periwinkle sat at a folding table at the front, flanked by two equally sour-faced board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her usual imperious demeanor was brittle, her smile stretched too tight. Most of the neighborhood was there, a sea of anxious, curious faces. The silent majority, now very much present. I took a seat in the front row, my briefcase on my lap. The weight of it was reassuring. Agnes began with a rambling, self-pitying monologue about divisive elements and unfounded attacks on her character and the good work of the HOA. She painted herself as a victim, a martyr for the cause of perfectly manicured lawns and compliant neighbors. When she finally, reluctantly, opened the floor to questions, I stood. A hush fell over the room. "Agnes," I began, my voice carrying easily in the small space, each word delivered with surgical precision. "You refer to malicious allegations. Let's discuss facts. Fact 1. You, or an agent of your realty company, Periwinkle Estates, illegally placed a for sale sign on my private property, my land, the Henderson Lake Ranch, and listed it for sale without my knowledge or consent. This is not an allegation. It is a demonstrable act of trespass and attempted fraudulent conveyance. Do you deny this?" All eyes swiveled to Agnes. A flush crept up her neck. "It was a regrettable error, already explained," she stammered. "An error that carries significant legal penalties, including potential revocation of your real estate license," I countered, my tone like chipped ice. "Which brings me to the State Realty Board investigation, currently active." A murmur went through the crowd. I continued, relentless. Fact 2. Your property at 14 Lakeside Drive features an unpermitted dock extension and an illegally constructed outbuilding encroaching on a public utility easement, both in violation of county zoning ordinances. The county zoning department has issued formal notices. Do you deny these violations?" Her mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The air crackled. I gestured to my briefcase. "I have copies of the notices, the official county plat maps, and photographic evidence, should anyone wish to review them." The neighbors were leaning forward now, a collective intake of breath. The tide was turning. Fact 3. I pressed on. The HOA's financial disclosures, mandated by its status as a non-profit corporation, show numerous irregularities. Significant sums paid to consultants who appear to have familial ties to you, Agnes, and whose services seem to have primarily benefited your personal property. This has prompted a formal request for a full independent audit, submitted by multiple concerned homeowners. The two board members beside Agnes were visibly shrinking. One of them, a mousy man named Arthur, actually began to slide his chair back. The deadpan sarcasm returned, sharp and lethal. One might almost suspect, Agnes, that the Lakeview Estates HOA has been less a community organization and more a personal enrichment scheme, or perhaps a vehicle for exercising a rather pronounced control issue. The room was silent, save for Agnes's ragged breathing. She looked trapped, exposed. This was the public reckoning. This was the consequence of her arrogance. She had picked a fight with a man who understood the architecture of power far better than she did. The denouement was swift, brutal, and utterly public. Agnes Periwinkle, stripped bare of her bluster, attempted a final, sputtering defense, claiming a conspiracy, a vendetta. But the meticulously assembled evidence I presented, document by document, fact by damning fact, left no room for doubt. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The cold, hard truth, delivered with surgical precision, was more devastating than any tirade. The on-screen text of legal filings and violation notices, which I had projected onto a small screen I'd brought, a visual cue that Gary had insisted upon, told the story more eloquently than Agnes's increasingly frantic denials. Each slide was a nail in the coffin of her credibility. And finally, I said, my voice dropping into a near whisper that somehow amplified the tension, there is the matter of the county registrar's office. I paused, letting the title hang in the air. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Agnes stared at me, comprehension slowly dawning in her eyes, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. You see, I continued, addressing the room but my gaze fixed on her. The county registrar is responsible for maintaining all official land records, property deeds, liens, and encumbrances. The office is also, by statute, an ex officio member of several oversight committees, including those that review HOA compliance and allegations of fraud. The silence was absolute. The status reveal twist had landed. When an HOA president, who is also a licensed realtor, attempts to illegally list a property for sale, a property whose owner happens to be intimately familiar with every nuance of title law and public record, it doesn't just raise red flags. It triggers a full-spectrum review. I let that sink in. Your actions, Agnes, weren't just an attack on me and my family. They were an affront to the legal framework that underpins all property rights in this county. You didn't just pick a fight with a neighbor. You challenged the very system I am sworn to uphold. The moral authority, slow burning until now, flared into full view. One of the neighbors, a retired judge I knew slightly, finally spoke, his voice resonating with judicial weight. Mrs. Periwinkle, given these revelations, I believe your position as president is untenable. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence. The motion was seconded so fast it was almost a single sound. The vote was nearly unanimous. Agnes was out, her reign of petty terror over. The two board members resigned on the spot, eager to distance themselves from the sinking ship. The aftermath was a flurry of legal activity. The state did indeed suspend Agnes's real estate license, pending a full investigation. The county levied significant fines for her zoning violations, forcing her to dismantle the illegal shed and dock. The independent audit of the HOA finances, overseen by a court-appointed forensic accountant, uncovered enough evidence of embezzlement to warrant a criminal referral. Agnes Periwinkle, the would-be empress, found herself facing not just public humiliation, but the very real prospect of legal charges. My land, my property, the ranch, was secure. The for sale sign had long since been removed, replaced by a new, stronger fence, a visual metaphor for boundaries respected, defiance rewarded. The fight had been intensely personal, a defense of family legacy. But it had also become something more, a restoration of order, a demonstration that even seemingly small abuses of power have consequences. The silent majority of neighbors, now galvanized, began the process of reforming their HOA, determined to create an organization that truly served the community, not the whims of a single individual. They even asked for my guidance in rewriting their bylaws, a request I accepted, though I made it clear my official capacity as county registrar precluded direct involvement beyond advice on legal compliance. The tactical ops metaphor had played out: reconnaissance, engagement, neutralization. The local corruption, albeit on a small scale, had been exposed. The climactic confrontation had resulted in the public embarrassment and downfall of the villain. There was a somber resilience in the victory, a quiet satisfaction. The emotional cost had been real, the righteous fury now banked, replaced by a protective loyalty to the peace we had fought to reclaim. That evening, I stood on my porch, the familiar porch light casting a warm glow, a return to control. The lake was calm, reflecting the twilight sky. My family was inside, safe. The locked gate at the end of the drive represented more than just physical security. It was psychological closure. They had crossed the line. They had trespassed on more than just my land. They had trespassed on my peace, my family, my history. And in doing so, they had awakened a reluctant warrior who understood that sometimes justice isn't found, it's forged, with cold-blooded calm and surgical precision, from the raw materials of truth and law. They didn't know I was the county registrar. Now, they did. And so did everyone else. Some fights you don't choose, but when they come to your door, you answer with everything you have. Because some things are worth defending, to the letter of the law and beyond.